Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day and a wonderful start to the new year. Hope you all had wonderful holidays. Happy New Year, all that kind of good stuff. So, looking forward to getting back in the swing of things here, and we're going to start off the new year with another episode of Admonition. We're going to take a look at SCP 6659 Metagnostic, I think is what this is pronounced. Metagnostic. Blah. So yeah, we're gonna take a look at this here by the Exploring series. Links will be down below as always in the description to the Exploring series channel and to the original video without my commentary and reaction. So please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video as we go through it, be sure to give it a like. And if you haven't already hit that sub button on the Exploring series channel, if you enjoy his content, do me a favor of showing the man some support and hitting that sub button on his channel. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live with my YouTube members, there's a join button underneath the video as well as a link in the description. If you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your support to the next level, take a look at that stuff. See if any of the benefits and tiers have any interest for you. With all that said though, get into the video. Again, this is SCP 6659 Metagnostic. I see the G in there and that's like throwing my brain off, but anyway. Monitor on, volume's good, let's go.
SCP 6659 Metagnostic. The SCP Foundation's general philosophy is that humanity is better protected from the anomalous by containing and researching SCPs rather than simply destroying them. That being said, there are rare occasions where something either can't be contained and must be destroyed,
Yep.
or the cons outweigh the pros in containing it. The amount of times that the Foundation has actually wanted to and succeeded in destroying an anomaly, however, is extremely small.
It seems like obviously I'm still going through a lot of the SCP, so I don't know all of the SCP stories and canons, but of the ones that I've gone through, it seems like when the SCP actually does try to destroy an SCP, that they have to, it usually goes very wrong and ends up being worse than when they started.
As many of these things simply can't be destroyed by conventional methods. Today's SCP concerns the Foundation on a bit of a warpath, effectively destroying quite a large number of entities that are generally considered to be gods.
Okay.
As they learn, of course, there are repercussions in doing so, however. The article begins by informing us that in order to assist in the study and response to an emergent containment scenario, all applied metaphysics, tactical theology, and counterceptual personnel have been provided express access to this document. Its clearance level has thus been lowered from level 5 top secret to level 4 secret. The components of SCP-6659 are housed within a high-security, semi-submersible research vessel, constructed from the remains of another SCP to benefit from its various technological capabilities and quasi-anomalous properties.
Interesting.
This vessel has been used to facilitate covert research operations, often relating to one or more hostile groups of interest that seek to prevent or manipulate said research.
I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? Having a mobile submersible base for super high-tech, highly secretive research that you don't want your enemies to find out about, It makes sense to have it on something like that, on a mobile platform that's difficult to track and find and whatnot. Hey, what's up, Michael? How you doing, brother? We're just getting started here. I wonder what SCP this facility is based off of, though. I mean, obviously the broken god is what comes to mind just because of technological stuff, but I can't think of off the top of my head what other. The only other SCP that comes to mind, I don't remember the number, but it's one where a ship had gotten lost at sea and had to do with like Scranton reality anchors that broke down on this ship and caused all kinds of fuckery, but that sounds not like this at all, because there was a lot of anomalous stuff that was left on there. So I don't really can't think of the top of my head what SCP this mobile submersible base or whatever would be based off of.
If any hostile party approaches, the vessel will fully submerge, and if any hostile parties manage to board the vessel, a series of explosive charges will detonate along the entire length of the vessel, with most of the crew aboard the vessel aware of this emergency procedure.
Yeah.
Before we're told what exactly SCP-6659 is, we're given a short excerpt from an essay written by Dr. John Blake from a book titled Journal of Tactical Theology, Volume 72. The essay,
It's like the SCP's version of Sun Tzu or something,
titled A Foundation for Reciprocal Worship, Practical Applications of Human to Deity Relations, reads, Gods exist because we believe in them, and to make us believe in them. The very nature of our relationship with the divine is reciprocal. We create beings of parahuman ability, whom we then elevate beyond ourselves and imbue with significance.
That's one of this subject alone is always one that kind of fascinates me in certain stories, especially in like the SCP universe and also in the 40K universe in general, right? Like, our belief in higher powers is what creates them and gives them their power. But then the question is, like, who really is the god? You know what I'm saying? Like, we are the ones who created them in the first place and are giving them their power. Yet they, because they now exist in our reality and have been given that power, they technically are greater than us and can lord over us. But we also then at the same time have the power to stop believing in them and stop giving them power, thus wiping them from existence as well. So it's one of those kind of like, I guess, paradoxical situations. I don't know. I find it interesting, that whole idea of we create the gods, but who really is kind of the god, you know what I'm saying? Like, who has really the higher power situation. Anyway.
These beings, in turn, rely on this recognition to define the scope and breadth of their influence and existence. Fundamental to this dynamic is the act of worship, an expression of recognition that embodies the deity in the psychosphere. While gods are real, their existence is derived from and contained within the realm of human thought. Their measurable manifestations in the physical world are restricted to the formation of totemic avatars.
Hey, what's up, Couchman?
Despite this limitation, such conceptual entities are capable of enacting change in the physical world around us, and frequently do so to varying extents, performing miraculous acts, manifesting their presence through omens, and bestowing boons upon chosen acolytes. The extent and nature of these direct interactions are shaped by and reflect the worship a deific entity receives from humans or non-human persons.
So, I wonder if could there be a situation, I feel like there could be, right? But could there be a situation where someone like really truly understands in this universe, the SCP universe or whatever, or any other kind of universe where this stuff happens, where they like really truly understand the relationship of, our belief in something is what then forms that belief, like manifests it into an actual god. And so could they then use that as a way of getting that god to give them powers to elevate them higher? You know what I'm saying? Like one of those kind of dynamics where someone like starts a cult or religion or belief system specifically to create a god, with the sole purpose of then having that god imbue them with greater powers to elevate them to do, whatever goals they had set out with to begin with,
The wills and capabilities of deific entities directly correlate both to the perception of such by humans, as well as their conceptual topography within the psychosphere. We created gods, and in doing so offered them the power and influence to shape their own image, and our perception of that image. Given this paradigm, the question emerges of how an organization such as the Foundation ought to respond to threats posed by deific entities. Thus far, standard operating procedure advocates for preventative measures. Organized religion and acts of worship have been quietly nudged towards conceptualization of gods as hands-off entities.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, again, the best way of dealing with a lot of these things would be to do it at like a ground level situation, right? Like if you can stop the belief and worship in a god, then you could at least weaken it to the point where it can't really have an effect. You may not be able to get rid of it altogether, because just like in a previous video, you know, where they talked about like the Scarlet King is kind of the concept and man of like the actual embodiment of like hate, you know? So like you can't really get rid of the concept of hate. It always exists and always will exist. But there could be ways of at least diminishing its effect and what's the word I'm looking for? I guess influence on humanity is what I'm looking for, and thus would weaken that god and or concept so that it may not always go away, but it could be brought down to a point of not being able to like really affect things in a real way in our reality. You know what I mean? To me, that feels like that would be the best way of going about it. Now, how you go about that exactly, you know, whether you like actually send out mobile task force or whatever to like go after these cultists and like, you know, arrest them, execute them in some way, or you try to influence the world, kind of like how the Emperor in the 40K did, try to influence the world to be more of a secular society that relies and believes more in science and the pursuit of technology and enlightenment that way. And kind of making like the idea of gods and religion like a taboo or faux pas or something like that. You know, that could be another way of going about it. But it's basically, it would be more of like playing kind of the long game kind of a situation, right? So, anyway.
Involvement in day-to-day affairs is inconsequential, or a uniform background presence that stabilizes consensus reality. While this method has been largely successful in ensuring hostile deific entities do not gain significant traction in mainstream culture and religious practices, current reactive measures to emergent threats are often inadequate. As directly combating the existence of a hostile god within the psychosphere is currently infeasible, the Foundation's response to active deific threats prioritizes dismantling systems of worship in the physical world that define and support the behavior of such a deity. However, identification and neutralization of cult formations engaging in active worship of malicious or normalcy-threatening deific entities have seen mixed results, with consequences ranging from high mortality rates of assigned operatives and numerous threats to the integrity of the Veil. The current method appears unsustainable. Deific entities are not locked to the physical world, including the cultural groups that engage in their worships. Through their manifestation in the psychosphere, they can traverse along lines of conceptual relation, touching and influencing different peoples around the world, inspiring new cult formations which themselves become and or splinter into divergent sects.
Okay, so the idea is that, I guess because they're in the psychosphere, the kind of collective unconsciousness of humanity that it's almost like a losing battle, because where on one side they might be making ground, kind of trying to remove worshippers, they then find other people through this collective unconsciousness to influence and get them to worship them, that way. So it's almost kind of like it's very much an uphill battle kind of a situation. So then, yeah, I guess the question is, what can you really do? I mean, they tried going into and removing a concept from the psychosphere, and that didn't turn out very well, you know. Uh, so it's like, what really is the other options then? Other than, I mean, like, what, do you create another god that is the antithesis of this god, and have them fight it out and try to eliminate each other? But then, like, what are the repercussions and consequences of that? Like, could you insert a concept into the psychosphere that is the opposite of the deity you're trying to fight against? And what, again, what would the consequences of that be?
So, obviously, a number of various gods exist in the SCP universe, and while the Foundation manages to keep many of them under control by influencing the religions based around them into viewing the gods as hands-off entities, there are some based around cults that are a little trickier. That's where SCP-6659 comes in, described as a Foundation-designed eigenweapon developed for the neutralization of hostile deific entities. This device is composed of 3 interconnected systems, which function to destabilize a given deific entity's embodied memeplex within the noosphere, preventing their conceptualization and consequently worship.
Gotcha.
In simpler words, it kills gods good.
Yep.
The first involved system is called the Trismegistus Engine Totemic Signifier, derived from an SCP that was developed for the conceptual mapping of communal human consciousness.
That's a hell of a word. We gotta listen to that again. What?
Trismegistus. In simpler words, it kills gods good. The first involved system is called the Trismegistus Engine Totemic Signifier.
I already forgot what the first part of that word is. What? The trisemic what?
It kills gods good. The first involved system is called the Trismegistus Engine Totemic.
Trismegistus Engine Totemic.
The first involved system is called the Trismegistus Engine Totemic Signifier.
Tristemiston. I already mispronounced it. Whatever. I'm gonna move on. That's a hell of a word. That's all I'm gonna say.
Derived from an SCP that was developed for the conceptual mapping of communal human consciousness. This system is employed to map existing relational lines of conceived association between a physical object and applicable memetic constructs.
They're getting into some really out there aspects of reality and consciousness, right? They're literally playing with the fundamentals of what consciousness is. And yeah, I don't know. It's also because, I guess it depends on the canon, right? But I think in general, the overall canons of the SCP universe rely on pataphysics. And so it's the other question is, right? If the SCP, Foundation knows about this, and they know that their reality is being created by the authors above them, how can they really even eliminate these concepts when the authors can just keep adding more concepts to their reality? You know what I mean? And then the other thing is if they have the power to then go into these various layers of consciousness and eliminate these concepts, what effect would that have on, I guess, our reality as the authors? You know what I'm saying? It's playing with some interesting ideas and concepts that are pretty out there. I would assume it would be a situation where because they're a lower reality, they can't really affect us, that it would just remove those concepts from their reality, but the authors could essentially just re-add them or rewrite them if they wanted to. It'd almost be like a situation where someone's writing a story and then all of a sudden, like, a line that has a concept in this SCP story gets removed and the author would just rewrite it, which would re-add it. You know, something along those lines, I would think is kind of how it would play out on like a pataphysics level.
In its current use, a totem, which is any item that is conceptually associated with a specific deific entity, is inserted into the device, which subsequently identifies and traces the boundaries of the relevant deific entity within the noosphere. In other words, it is used to directly locate the god in question, which is where the second system comes in.
Right.
The second system, called the Geduli-Jerry Conceptual Applicator, applies a conceptual framework of universal acceleration to all individual data points forming the mimetic construct. As a result, the data composing the deific entity is accelerated to supraconceptual velocities, whereby the individual components of the mimetic construct can only be conceived in relation to their relative accelerated movement. As a result, the lines of conceptual relations that form the construct weaken and subsequently dissolve, rendering the construct incapable of cohesively existing as an assemblage within the noosphere, and thus preventing any interaction between data points, both external and internal to the construct.
So they have a device that seems to be, at least in two parts from what he's saying so far. The first part is to find the concept in the noosphere, and then the other part is to essentially break the data points from being able to interact with each other. Thus, they essentially would just dissolve away into nothing.
Cutting out the jargon, then, this part just prevents people from conceptualizing the deity itself.
Right.
This makes the entity incapable of being worshipped, as you can't worship something that you can't really think about, and the deity is effectively dead because of this. The third system, then, the Generation 7 Biomechanical Data Storage Vault,
Gen 7.
consists of 25 vats containing biomechanical computational devices suspended in artificial cerebrospinal fluid. This system is capable of storing and analyzing mimetic data of conceptually isolated and accelerated deific entities without engaging in reciprocal conceptual relationships, i.e., worship.
Right.
The computational systems of this component additionally monitor the ongoing processes of the first two systems, while simultaneously providing a digi-noospheric interface for human users to examine and interpret relevant conceptual data. To summarize, the whole device locates and isolates the god, and then cuts it off from human conceptualization, which effectively kills it, while the Foundation can continue to monitor it just in case. Moving on.
I miss back when the SCP Foundation was about horror and quirky ideas, not just people writing fictional science essays. I mean, it's fascinating, but yeah. I don't know. They're definitely getting into some very far out there topics. And it is interesting and fascinating. But I guess it's just, what are you kind of looking for in an SCP story? You know what I'm saying? Like, do you prefer the kind of more X-Files, shorter, stories kind of things? Or like you said, do you prefer these giant, I guess canons is the proper word for it, like these giant cannons where they like have this massive world building, going on.
The document continues with the project that created this device, Project Deicidium. The introductory briefing is written by the two co-leads.
But so far, like, I've been enjoying Admonition, but there's definitely a lot of concepts and terms and things going on that really, like, make me feel like I need a quantum physics degree. You know what I'm saying? It's not like I'm not understanding or not keeping up, but it's like, again, it's just getting into some very kind of obscure and very, I guess deep would be the proper word, ideas of reality and consciousness and how things interact. And there's a lot of jargon and words revolving around those things, you know? And I mean, to the Exploring series credit, he does a very good job of like saying what it is and then kind of summarizing it and breaking it down into like as plain of language as he can, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know, but yeah, the like this canon so far in particular, I think that might be also part of what is like so good about the cactus verse and the Ouroboros cycle and that kind of canon stuff is like it's very you know, very interesting and deep world building and how a lot of these SCPs react in ancient times and you know ancient kind of lost history stuff, which is also fascinating, but it's also like not getting into these ultra, you know, reality bending concepts that can be hard to kind of really wrap your mind around. You know, it's like I guess it's easy to understand, you know, and kind of really be able to allow you to visualize what's going on. Whereas a lot of these, again, so far in admonition, not that I again haven't been enjoying it. It's just it feels like half the videos so far are listening to kind of like a quantum physics lecture for you to understand what's supposed to be happening in the story.
Dr. Sandra Milton and Dr. John Blake. The document continues with the project that created this device, Project Deicidium. The introductory briefing is written by the two co-leads, Dr. Sandra Milton and Dr. John Blake. Milton states that the initial proposal for this project focused more broadly on the creation of an anomaly employed by the Foundation for the decommissioning of other anomalous phenomena. But the subtext clearly was that they required a means to combat gods. The Foundation, for all of its grandiose notions and ideas, remains an institution of bricks, mortar, bodies, and paper, and so they need to know where their limitations are so that they can push beyond them. SCP-6659 is a culmination of that drive.
I mean, so far from everything that I'm hearing here, right? I mean, and I guess again, you don't really know what the consequences and repercussions are, but like, I would think that it would probably be easier, right? Like, so like gods obviously exist in the SCP universe, and there's a lot of harmful and, you know, malicious entities and beings out there, like the Scarlet King, etc., that want to just, you know, destroy and devour everything. So, like, if they understand the concept of how to create gods, why not just go through the process of creating gods that are specifically set up to protect humanity from these other entities and beings, right? And if their power is based on how much worship they get, just provide them with more power than everything else so that these protector beings would be the most powerful beings out there so that these other, you know, terrible entities wouldn't be able to do anything, right? Like, I feel like that would be, instead of, you know, trying to develop technologies to go into the noospheres and the collective unconsciousness and playing with consciousnesses and things in a reality that you don't really necessarily understand and you can't predict the consequences and outcomes of it, you know, create essentially deities that you understand and know how to control, you know, that are there to protect you. Now, again, I mean, that might be a lot easier said than done. But I feel like that might be the better route to go than trying to just destroy concepts. Like, well, because like that's basically what this is like boiling down to, is like trying to remove concepts from like reality and consciousness so people can't worship them, right? No problem, Couchman. Take it easy, brother. I'll have the video up for you later. But yeah, I feel like that might be the better way of going about it, right? Like creating deities that you understand and can, I guess, control, that are there and set up to protect you, and that you have, I guess, control over the amount of power you're feeding to them, and thus if something were to go wrong or whatever, you can like shut that off. Again, that's probably easier said than done, but that would be my way of wanting to pursue it if that was like up to me, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, let's continue.
Drive to extend beyond the physical. Although the noosphere, or the psychosphere, permeates every aspect of our lives, the Foundation's ability to alter it has been unrefined at best.
Right.
They require a new approach to accomplish their goals when it comes to non-physical threats, as they've been dying aimlessly in the dark, hoping to pull it off. They need to become the scalpel, capable of exorcising specific dangers with negligible damage to those living in the light. That's where Project Deicidium comes in, a way to deal with these mimetic constructs that are worshipped as deities. Those who threaten the Foundation will be contained, their influence and danger mitigated, and the world will keep turning. Dr. Blake, however, says that they shouldn't be too hasty. The notion of worship is not exclusive to what we would typically consider deific entities. Modern society elevates nearly every facet of contemporary life beyond its inherent value and means, including democracy, family, and capitalism. Each of these concepts defines our relationship to the world, and they're all in flux, changing and shifting based on individual minds, informed by their beliefs and their local collective consciousnesses, developing new forms with cultural shifts over time. What exactly is the distinction between such a concept and a deific entity, then? The difference they can point to is that these concepts are inert unless acted upon, responsive to the human, rather than engaged reciprocally. Recent findings, however, indicate that this is a false assumption, and they've begun to see that these concepts actually do respond, influencing us in ways we do not fully understand yet. It's possible that the conceptual entity wishes us harm in order to change our understanding of the world. Even then, though, the distinction is murky, as a new political theory, relationship to nature, or revolutionary technology may very well straddle this divide. The world can shift and change in response to what were previously assumed to be simply non-anomalous processes and influences. The process of apotheosis, in which someone or something becomes a god, is ill understood at best. The Foundation claims to know what a god is, intrinsically, if not rationally, but they're ignorant as to how exactly they are formed within our collective conscious.
So, I mean, and then, yeah, my idea of what I was saying earlier wouldn't necessarily work because they don't understand how they are essentially formed and created to begin with. So that would go against, you know, what my theory was, or my way of wanting to combat this by just creating other deities that were with the sole purpose of protecting humanity.
The Foundation itself, which is a secret gathering of people working towards a common goal, elevating the notion of securing, containment, and protection, may not be that different from the faith-driven groups they target.
Right. Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, I mean, like, the SCP Foundation has enough people in it and enough belief in it that it kind of has taken to life in and of itself, with its own concept, and it in and of itself might be a god of a certain make, you know.
Project Deicidium is necessary, but it is a grave uncertainty.
Because I mean, like, the idea is that the Foundation exists to contain and secure anomalies, and anomalies exist because the Foundation exists to contain them. Or it could be the vice versa of that, where anomalies exist, and because anomalies exist, the SCP Foundation is the opposite, which is there to contain them. And so it's kind of like the yin-yang counterbalance kind of situation, where one cannot exist without the other. And so they both kind of exist as, like, maybe there is actually a god of anomalies, and that's what keeps creating these anomalies. And thus the opposite would be the Foundation, and maybe there is a god of the Foundation, or the Foundation, the concept of the Foundation, is a god in and of itself, and they're opposites of each other.
As this is a new relationship between humans and the divine, and the very relationship itself, if elevated via worship, could have grave implications. They risk idolizing the destruction of their idols, and they know not what ground they tread in doing so. With all that said, though, grave implications be damned, and the testing commences regardless.
Yeah, that's pretty much the Foundation.
The first activation of the machine was tested on a deity that has been completely removed from the record, which is a great start. That's not to say that it's been redacted by someone higher up in the Foundation, but rather that the text is no longer legible, since they've been removed from human conceptualization.
Interesting, okay.
The note for the test states that while the results cannot be verified, it's hypothesized that the activation of the machine resulted in the complete obliteration of its noospheric relations, and thus it, any information describing it, and any association it had to any objects or worshippers are now impossible for human subjects to conceptualize.
Okay, so I mean, that makes sense, right? The idea is that it doesn't, it still exists. The concept has just become impossible for humanity to understand. Thus, it can't conceptualize it. Thus, it can't believe in it and or worship it anymore. So it's not that it's gone, and it's not that evidence of it isn't there anymore. It's just that we can't understand it. The interesting thing about that, though, is, right, like, we by nature are very curious, so wouldn't the idea of then creating that mystery, like, make people want to pursue understanding what it is, right? And thus, even though they might not be able to understand that concept, the pursuit of trying to solve that mystery and them coming up, like, essentially they could create more deities or other gods by just their imagination running wild trying to solve this mystery. You know what I'm saying? That's essentially what I'm getting at, is like, there's, a puzzle, a mystery, whatever, something they can't necessarily understand, and then the search for understanding leads them to create something else. And so again, this becomes like this never-ending uphill battle of trying to put out these fires that they're essentially recreating in other ways.
Efforts are underway to refine the process to ensure that the actual objects they use to initiate the process remain conceptual afterwards. The second test goes better in this regard, as they targeted a deity worshipped by the followers of the Angel's Path, using a shriveled, mummified hand as the totem. The results indicate that the deity was completely destabilized and can no longer be conceptualized, but obviously the worshippers and the totem remain intact. The third test targeted Saint Bernard, using a carton of 2% milk and a crucifix as the totems. This is in reference to a repeated scene in medieval art showing the Virgin Mary feeding milk to Saint Bernard.
Interesting.
It seems that the former worshippers of Saint Bernard treated him as a separate deity, and in the aftermath of the activation, the Foundation has been at work to alter the mythology concerning Saint Bernard to conflate with common Christian doctrine. This includes the canonization of Saint Bernard as a Christian saint, and the proliferation of art imitating medieval and Renaissance artists showing the Virgin Mary scene, suggesting that Bernard formerly had his own connection to milk. 3 more activations of the machine have been completely omitted from the record, for reasons unknown, but the 7th activation targeted the Children of the Scarlet King, using a sacrificial dagger as the totem.
Okay.
The results indicate that the Scarlet King itself is gone, unable to be conceptualized by humans anymore. However, due to the high degree of thaumaturgical users in position of leadership within the cult, various small groups have continued to operate afterwards. Surveillance indicates that the anomalous phenomena associated with these individuals are founded upon other thaumaturgic systems, and bears no relation to the Scarlet King itself.
Interesting.
In other words, the cultists can be dealt with using more traditional methods.
Gotcha.
What follows must have been pretty routine work for the Foundation, as the machine was activated another 175 times.
I mean, so far it seems like things are working out for me, right? They're eliminating gods and concepts and things like that. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of backlash. The problem is right, like I feel like eventually you start to eliminate so many concepts and things like that like, are we then like limiting our own knowledge and understanding in general of like the universe and reality, right? Like, I don't know what I don't know what I'm trying to say, but essentially, like, are we removing more and more knowledge of our, that we have access to? I don't know how I want to say it, but it's just the idea, like, we're eventually going to hit like a threshold to where like we've eliminated so many, I guess, concepts and ideas and things like that out of the noosphere that like, are we going to essentially like de-evolve, I guess, because we're going to lose intelligence, lose understanding, not being able to conceptualize anything? Will it like remove creativity and our, creative processes, things like what's the negative side of this going to be?
With all of these activations having been omitted from the record. Activation number 182, however, which targeted a deity worshipped by the 9th Green Lodge and used a deer skull as the totem, ended with inconclusive results. The first 2 systems of the machine appeared to successfully isolate and destabilize the deity, but during the review of the data by the 3rd system, a series of cascading errors led to a catastrophic system failure.
That's not good.
6 of the vats composing the 3rd system ruptured, with salt water found in the remnants, and a power surge emanating from the 1st system caused an electrical fire within the machine's control room.
Interesting. Okay. So now parts of the system have been broken, but obviously will need to be replaced and repaired. So I wonder what other concept, like what other, I just had like a mind blank. I was thinking of a word and then something else popped in my brain, some other thought. Now I've lost what I was thinking about before. Anyway, let's continue.
The technicians that were supervising the 2nd system spontaneously de-manifested, with one of them re-manifesting 5 meters above sea level adjacent to the site, and the other individual remaining missing, presumed deceased. As a result, the operation of the machine has been suspended, with an investigation underway. Doctors Milton and Blake gathered a number of technicians working on the project to discuss their findings in the aftermath. One technician in particular noticed some discrepancies in the data from the third system during the failed activation. The technician clarifies that the discrepancy didn't actually occur during the incident, as the whole system went haywire during that period. He explains that the third system monitors the deity in the noosphere, ensuring that there's no latent activity going on afterwards. They call this baseline state sterile, which means that there's no interaction between data points which previously composed the construct.
Gotcha.
While reviewing the data, however, they noticed some activity in the data cluster of a deific entity that they'd previously destroyed.
So it seems like a deity that they previously destroyed, the concept of it has been reinserted into reality, causing a malfunction in the machine.
The data shows a flurry of activity related to a dead entity over the course of 6 hours, before the activity dissipated back to nothing, as though it never happened, which is part of why they missed this until now. All relevant data shows that the activation that destroyed this deity was completely successful, with this instance being the only irregularity. While it's entirely normal for new lines of conceptual association to form as human conception expands and changes, their use of the machine should have made this impossible. While it's theoretically possible that this was just a spontaneous, random series of interactions between human consciousness and a dead god, the technician doesn't think that's really feasible.
Right.
The noosphere is a linked network, so things respond to each other, but the individual points within this data cluster were completely isolated.
So again, like, I wonder if it's a situation where pataphysically, the authors, people in our universe, are just reinserting these concepts into this, canon storyline, or if it's just a situation where, like, these concepts are part of the fundamental fabric of reality and they can't really be destroyed. They might be able to be suppressed for a certain amount of time, but eventually they will reemerge because it's just a fundamental part of reality, a fundamental part of humanity. Maybe some of these concepts have a relation to certain kinds of emotions or ideas or thoughts that are just part of what it is to be human, and so they can't be wiped out, or if they are wiped out, they eventually will reemerge and it causes these catastrophic issues in the system, or what?
They also didn't just interact along previous lines of relation, but rather formed new ones, which would require this section of the cluster to be actively acted upon, which again should be impossible. Dr. Blake asks if this suggests that something outside of the human noosphere caused this, which, even if such a thing were possible, humans would have no way of knowing,
right,
since we can't comprehend something outside of our realm of comprehension. Blake then asks if they could run some tests to try and isolate what caused this by mapping the new lines of association. Dr. Milton, however, says that not only would that entail engineering new brain computers capable of more complex thought than their own, but it would be very inadvisable due to the fundamental property that they can't know what they're dealing with. Blake counters by saying that this is what they designed the machine to do, and why have it if they're not going to target new threats? They've seen what deific entities are capable of, and if this thing isn't responsive to the machine, then they're in the dark. He asks the technician if he can try and isolate whatever the new complex causing the interactions is, but Milton stops him, saying that they're not getting started on this, at least not until repairs are finished.
I mean, yeah, you gotta at least fix the machine,
An
right?
argument ensues, with Milton stating that they're not just dealing in theory, as there are repercussions, and a man has gone completely missing as a result. She said,
so yeah, like, is this part of what I was saying earlier, like the diminishing returns, where like people start getting eliminated from reality or something like that because they're removing concepts, you know, like, I don't know, is it just breaking down like the fundamental fabric of like reality and causing people to not exist, or, you know, like I said, move around, it's altering reality, or is it because it's removing certain concepts that would have led to a person's, you know, conception? By removing them, that person's conception never happened, kind of a situation, you know? Like, are we getting into those levels of cause and effect? I don't know.
says that a memo came in from the O5 Council telling them to cease testing for the foreseeable future, and they're sharing information from their tests with other Foundation sites.
Okay, so the
The
O5
project
stepping in and
itself
taking
isn't
over,
shut
it seems.
down yet. They're just hitting pause and getting some more eyes on the situation. Afterwards, Dr. Blake left the conference room in an agitated state, with the rest of the meeting revolving around ongoing repairs to the machine. Sometime later, in relation to a breach incident, a transcript was taken from a security feed inside of Dr. Milton's quarters, showing a conversation between Milton and Blake. Blake apologizes for getting hot-headed during the meeting, saying that he was caught up in his own reaction to the news and was negligent of the larger project. Milton understands, saying that this whole thing has their nerves a little frayed.
Yeah, I would say so.
Blake then asks if he ever told her that he used to be a pastor. He says that he was really convinced that it was what he was meant to do, to spread the word of God. He honestly wasn't too keen on the specific doctrine, but he did believe there was something truly transcendent out there, watching us. That changed when he joined the Foundation. And he finds it funny that learning that gods are real and they're fallible is what broke his faith. The more they study them and understand them, the less they seem like gods. They're able to point to them and say, "That's God, right there." And now, with SCP-6659, they can essentially annihilate them.
Well, and I mean, right, like, the idea that we are the ones that are creating gods and giving them their power through concept and worship, because we're fallible, that would then in turn mean that the gods that we create would be fallible, correct? I mean, I guess you could also have the concept of a truly omniscient and infallible God and worship that, and thus create a truly omniscient and infallible God. But, you know, I would think that, yeah, most of these deities, beings, or whatever probably would be flawed because we are the ones that created them and we're flawed.
There's nothing wondrous about that, or transcendental. Milton responds that it's always been like that, whether he knew about it or not. It's just that they're now starting to understand how these entities interact with us. Blake understands that, but wonders if there shouldn't be more, and points to whatever caused that strange reaction, which could be something else entirely. Before he continues suggesting what it could be, though, he says that he's just tired and stressed, so Milton says that he might want to transfer off the project or take a sabbatical. Blake, however, says that there's no rest for the godless, and grabs a copy of the meeting's transcript before leaving. Immediately following this, Dr. Blake is seen entering the control room for SCP-6659, where he removes his glasses and seals the door to the room, putting a chair into the rotating locking mechanism to prevent it from being opened.
What you doing here, brother?
He then turns and faces the security camera and states that his name is Reverend John Blake. Until this moment, he was acting co-lead of Project Deicidium, representing the Foundation's Department of Tactical Theology. He is of sound body and mind, and is acting under his own volition. He states that he intends to insert his own head into the machine to act as a totem, in an effort to map the entity responsible for the prior incident.
Okay.
He suspects that mapping the human brain and likeness will reveal a transcendent deity embodying the concept of humanity. To do this, he took Dr. Milton's activation key without her knowledge or consent.
I mean, yeah, that's an interesting concept and idea in and of itself. Like, there is an actual god that represents the core of what it is to be human and humanity. And so that there would be a deity of that out there, and in order to find it, you would, have to have some kind of link from the human existence to it.
He is acting independently, and what he is about to do has been in no way permitted or condoned by any of the personnel at this site. He then proceeds to insert both activation keys into the central console and activates the machine, overriding safety protocols as he does so. He then opens the compartment of the first system of the machine, reserved for suitable totems, kneels before it, and inserts his head into the device. A period of several minutes passes as initiation procedures commence, which is noticed by maintenance personnel who activate an emergency alarm. The scuttle system is primed, which would detonate the entire site, with firing control given to Captain Jones, while crew members are dispatched to apprehend Dr. Blake. Blake begins to mumble incomprehensibly as the machine continues to operate, while personnel grab a laser torch and begin to cut through the door's hinges. Blake's body then begins to convulse, with an unidentified clear liquid seeping from the central compartment of the device, pooling around Dr. Blake's knees. He mumbles about something seeing him, and he can't move, with a
So I wonder if this is actually going to have the reverse effect and bring whatever this deity or entity is into, like, allow it a gateway into our reality through him.
A tumor of thought having seized him.
Tumor of thought.
He says that God wishes to show him, and it's inside. The personnel then manage to open the door, rushing inside to find Blake's unmoving body. An emergency shutdown of the machine is initiated, and the scuttle system is deactivated. Blake's body is taken in for an autopsy, where they find that various lobes of his brain had undergone extensive and presumably anomalous manipulation, resulting in severe contortions to the tissue of the cerebrum and cerebellum. A large quantity of liquid was found in his mouth, nose, and ears, which seems to be a mixture of cerebrospinal fluid and salt water, the same that was found in the third system after the first incident. Thanks to the technological wizardry of the Foundation, however, they managed to take Blake's brain and generate a transcript of his thoughts during the scan.
That's some tech right
His
there.
initial thoughts were surprise that he was interfacing at all with the device, as it should have just been scanning his mind. His second thought was wondering where his body was, followed by him seeing a sort of infinite space laid out before him, which he believes to be the noosphere itself.
I can see that.
There is a background.
Like, it sounds like he essentially projected his consciousness through this machine to what essentially would be the noosphere, and that's probably how he's able to interpret what it is, and then it leads him to this, I guess, god of humanity, idol of humanity, whatever you want to call it.
Be the noosphere itself. There is a background of darkness, interrupted ambiently by points of soft light. Some lights drift in all directions, while others beam toward each other, trading places, forming shapes, connections, ley lines.
Probably information.
Each one of these lights that he looks at twinkles at him, and instantly he knows something. An immensely small building block of data, a fundamental particle of an applicable concept. There is no scale to this world, and like clouds, everything looks much closer than it likely is. He hears an immensely dim whisper emitting from behind his mind. He turns, or appears to turn, to face it, and it gasps out to him, as if straining. He looks to the sound, but there is nothing to illuminate the space. The lights keep their distance, shine away from the whisper's source. He wills himself to move toward the darkness, and the voice beckons again for him to approach, each heaving breath triggering a flash of dim red, getting stronger as he moves towards it. The points of light wave wildly behind him, shining patterns into his thought. They tell him not to go, to...
It feels like, again, he's moving towards the Scarlet King just because of the red flashes. You know, that's what it makes me think. And so these other things of information are telling him not to go there towards it. I don't know. That's where my brain's going from this anyway, so I guess let's see what happens here.
Patterns into his thought. They tell him not to go, to worship them instead, that it is better this way. But he cannot hear them over the Savior's call. He tells the voice that he has kept his faith, and he has always known it to be greater than these idols. As he reaches the center of the darkness, the red billows up around him. He hears a great shrieking in the sky above, and looks up to see an enormous obsidian tower in front of him, formed from the inky black. The tower churns and pulses, with something blurred from the record for being incomprehensible. Its infinite, impossible structure branches out into a web of hundreds of hands, each of its fingers branching into another 100 hands. The impossible scale of God bears down upon him as its hands reach into his mind. At the center of it all, a wet, sliding noise cracks apart the sky, and an enormous eye opens. The hyper-dodecahedron folds in upon itself and impresses the Holy Spirit upon him. The whisper erupts into static and tells him something else blurred from the record. Blake thinks that God sees him and knows his faith. It reaches into his thoughts, and his hands scream at him, but his hands are gone, with only fingers remaining. He hums as the red fills his vision, and God brings him up closer, pulling him into its maw, breaking down the human structure and making him an angel of its coven.
Jesus.
There is no other option but to offer his mind to it and submit to salvation. His last thoughts are that God is horrifying. God is beautiful. God is a tumor. And there is nothing else.
Jesus.
So, it seems that
that's some crazy, like, eldritch horror shit right there. I mean, it feels kind of Scarlet King-ish to me. You know, it might not be. It could very well be this other, you know, human idol, or it could be that the Scarlet King is supposed to be, like, the representation of that, you know, like the darkness of humanity or something like that. But it could be something completely different. But, yeah, I don't know, just... that description is just it's terrifying but cool at the same time. The whole idea of seeing this kind of blurred obsidian tower, um and I forget what the, again, I'm bad at remembering the SCP numbers. There's only a few of them that I really remember, but there's, I think it's Hofos or whatever, their idea of the Scarlet King story, where there was kind of this tower that the Scarlet King was a part of. That's another reason why I feel like this is going into the Scarlet King, but just the description of this kind of like massive obsidian tower that's blurred and obscured from understanding because it had been erased. And I also wonder, like, if what he's seeing, the way he's seeing it, is like almost a representation of what God, the like overall God's, real God, I guess you could say, like vengeance or punishment is from having been erased and coming back. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. This is a very interesting description, though.
That Dr. Blake believed. So it seems that Dr. Blake believed that the entity outside of human comprehension that could influence things mysteriously is actually the one true God. He used only the first part of the machine, the one that lets you find and isolate a deific entity, by using his own brain as a totem. His thought was that the God of humanity would ultimately be the total embodiment of humanity.
So before we get any further, it could also be, so like he used his own brain as a totem, and so it very well could be that his perception of what he thinks God is, when he put himself in there, literally created this new deity. And that could have been what the whispering and the gasping breath was, is this God trying to come into existence, and then by him following to it and his faith in it, then burst it into existence. And as a reward for doing it, this God created him as its first angel. That could also be what really happened here. So he could have actually created a new entity by just doing this.
And by mapping out the human brain and likeness, it would locate this transcendent entity. Unfortunately, it seems that he got a bit more than he bargained for, as the entity he located doesn't seem to have much in common with the typical image of the Christian God.
Yeah.
Following the incident, Dr. Milton was confined to her quarters pending an investigation, and the O5 Council appointed Director Placeholder McDoctorate as project lead. There's another section of the document, which starts with a warning that the following addenda materials constitute info-hazardous and highly anti-memetic vectors. What follows is a project update on a new project known as Prometheum, helmed by Placeholder. In the update, Placeholder states that the noosphere can be thought of as the set of all ideas humans are capable of conceptualizing.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be thought of as a collective consciousness, but much more literally, it is the aggregate of the informational structures contained within all human brains, meaning the sum total of all conscious and subconscious thoughts that humans are having at any given instant.
Right.
Recent studies go so far as to suggest that every bit of information within human thought space corresponds directly to a unique neuron or category thereof in some number of human brains. What this all means, however, is that it has serious implications upon the consequences of Project Deicidium and SCP-6659.
Right. Like I said earlier, I think it's a situation where, like, as they're removing, concepts from the noosphere, they're also essentially removing just in general human knowledge. And, like, I feel like eventually they will have such a diminishing return that we lose certain abilities. We learn certain knowledge, we lose certain understanding, certain abilities, creative abilities, things like that. Again, I also feel like it would be a situation where, like, you remove a certain kind of knowledge, but there are still clues to that knowledge left behind. And due to our curious nature as human beings, we would want to, like, someone along the lines would, end up searching for what the true understanding of this knowledge is. And either that knowledge would then be reinserted into the noosphere, or some other similar concept would be, right? So I still feel like there's no real way that they would be able to, like, truly remove certain ideas, concepts, etc. from existence forever. Which is kind of like what happened with this entity being brought back. I feel like that's kind of evident of that.
Machine maps out a collection of concepts associated with a deific entity and alters said concepts so that connections between them cannot form within the noosphere. The individual conceptual elements can still be comprehended, but the overall construct of the deity is no longer perceptible. If these conceptual elements map to physical segments of the human brain, much more is being severed than just deific relations.
Right.
In the 6 months since Blake's incident, various forms of mental degradation have been observed in minor fractions of the population, including increased rates of early onset dementia, aphasia, dysphagia, and acute paralysis. Various disinformation campaigns have been enacted to hide these increased rates, but the likelihood of such developments appear to be vastly more common in individuals whose primary entities of worship were those destroyed by the machine. Evidently, the complex nature of conceptual association is not, and likely functionally cannot be, understood by humans.
Right.
Essentially, what he's saying is that by more or less destroying these entities that are created and sustained by human thoughts, the Foundation was also destroying small parts of people's brains that were responsible for creating the entity.
So it's almost like, the noosphere in and of itself is a brain that is, like, every human being is like a neuron that is inside, every human being is like a representation, like a physical neuron to this overall noosphere. And as you're removing concepts from that, you're removing, information and whatnot in reality from someone. I don't know if that's really kind of a proper way of saying it, but basically what I was saying earlier is correct, that, like, by removing knowledge and information, you're essentially causing, like, actual literal physical harm to people, because you're also removing it from people's brains in and of itself. You're actually doing physical damage to people and causing, essentially mental disorders, Alzheimer's, etc., like he said.
What's even more troubling is the entity that Blake gave his life to discover. His final actions represent an unprecedented leap of faith in the direction of an entity beyond conception, one that we should hardly be able to think about. Dr. Blake's faith was shattered by the machine, resulting in a vacuum of worship, but his brain began searching for bigger, more powerful ideas, and the idea noticed. They have forced human cognition to expand into deeper, uncharted waters, and they are unprepared for the horrors which lay there. So, entities like this exist because human thought gives them substance and power, while the original purpose of the machine was to cut them off from human consciousness,
Right.
rendering them powerless. What they have now, however, is an entity that exists outside of human consciousness, but one that is somehow being thought of thanks to Blake, which is giving it power. Obviously, Project Deicidium is no use here, and is overall not a good plan of destroying gods due to the unexpected side effects. That's where Project Prometheum comes in, the goal of which is to combat extra noospheric threats via channeled worship of the ideal of humanity.
I'm sure, so like, I don't know. I'm sure that's going to work out just fine. I'm sure there's going to be no repercussions or consequences of that whatsoever. You know, we're going now beyond the noosphere into things that we can't even begin to comprehend and understand, and trying to remove them is what that sounds like. So I'm sure everything will work out fine.
In other words, they're going to take Blake's concept of a god of humanity and create it.
Yeah. Which is basically what I was saying earlier, right? Like, I was going to kind of wait until I guess I'll just wait till the end of the video as part of my final thoughts.
Entity, which is extrapolated from humanity and normalcy aligned ideals, is to be personified as Titan class Olympian entity 014.
I'm just a genius. You know, what can I say? What can I say? I understand and have created these solutions for the SCP Foundation, but, you know, before they even went through this whole process. What can
This
I say?
deity's identity as progenitor and assistant of human civilization and development, punished unfairly by its brethren, is to be propagated as a mimetic construct by all possible non-disruptive vectors, including manipulation of education systems, entertainment industries, and religious groups of interest, anomalous or otherwise. So, they're going to take this idea of a god that protects and watches over humanity and turn it into the next big religion, giving it more and more power. The entity is obviously based on Prometheus, the Titan in Greek mythology,
Right.
that stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, known for being a champion of humanity. Throughout all this, the entities that exist outside of the noosphere will be generally ignored by as many Foundation personnel as possible, while still maintaining efficacy in Project Prometheum's operations. Once this religion based around Prometheus has escalated to the point where he has become a proper god, systematized large-scale prayer by Foundation personnel will begin, in order to locate potential hostile extra-noospheric entities and isolate them into human-safe fragments. These fragments will then be targeted in tandem by both Prometheus and SCP-6659, taking extreme care to re-render them dormant. Then, these dormant components of human thought space are to be restructured into either the Prometheus memeplex or another humanity and normalcy aligned eideatic construct. The noosphere's gaps are to be filled and fortified such that it possesses the necessary cognitive defenses to handle higher order concepts. So far, a composite of selectively human-safe fragments of the entity encountered by Dr. Blake has been located and rendered into a highly anti-mimetic iconographic depiction.
I'm getting, like, is this supposed to be getting into the fifth of stuff now with, like, the starfish entity? Because that's what a lot of the symbology kind of is reminding me of here.
We're then shown an image of the depiction, which shows a star inside of a circle, surrounded by hands, along with various other stars around it. The following eideatic complexes have been targeted: quinary mathematical operations, meaning fifth, the primordial ideals of rage and violence, the perception of many disparate points as composing some larger shape, i.e. constellation, the arbitration of optimistic ideals into unreasoned/indefensible motivations, i.e., defeatism, and something else that has been blurred from the record, no longer comprehensible by humans. In order to get a full understanding of what all went down here, we need to look at the text that has been blurred out throughout this document, due to being removed from human comprehension. This starts with the very first activation of the machine, which turns out to have been quite a doozy. The Foundation targeted a deity worshipped by a group known as the Disciples of the Unseen. The totem they used for this one was actually an SCP, one you're likely familiar with, SCP-055. SCP-055 is known as the quintessential anti-meme, something that simply cannot be recalled in any way by human minds, so any information about it just slips right through and is forgotten instantly. What this document reveals, however, depending on headcanon of course, is that SCP-055 is actually the skull of the last monarch of a human subspecies known as Homo sapiens invisibili. This subspecies coexisted with normal humans until their latent anti-memetic properties became evident, leading normal humans to systematically wipe them all out over the course of the 19th century. In other words, this was a species that all possessed anti-memetic properties to a degree, and we wiped them out. Some sort of cult, however, continued to worship them, creating a hostile entity in the noosphere, one obviously opposed to us normal humans.
Right.
When the skull was put into the machine and activated, however, the normal process of the machine began to go haywire, and rather than just preventing the entity from being conceptualized, it actually booted all of the conceptual information out of the noosphere entirely. This means that any information about SCP-055, the subspecies, the cult, and the entity are no longer able to be conceptualized by humans.
Right. I'm following you.
The Foundation, now left with just a weird anti-meme, tossed it into storage and simply continued on their way with SCP-6659. The second instance of blurred text is from Blake's thoughts during his incident, when he views the Great Obsidian Tower formed from the inky black. The text states that the tower churns and pulses with something, which is actually the will of, followed by what can only be described as a form of squiggly line. While this symbol is actually a part of the Telugu language, in the SCP universe it corresponds to a single entity, SCP-3125. 3125 is a hostile memeplex that exists outside of human comprehension and is associated with fifthism.
Right. Yeah.
It is the ultimate anti-meme, an entity that is only partially intersecting our universe, and
if you like understand or are able to think about it, you die, essentially. And yeah, it's trying to like enter our reality to destroy everything, kind of a thing.
If anyone becomes aware of its existence, they are utterly obliterated, along with pretty much anyone the person is close with.
Which is probably what happened to that one researcher where they said, you know, the machine malfunctioned, one researcher got shot up to, above sea level, and then one guy just disappeared. He probably saw the concept of this entity and was then wiped out.
It's easily one of the most threatening entities in existence.
Yep.
And now it seems the Foundation is unwittingly in a battle against it. The entity whispers to Blake that no god he could ever conceive could compare to it. And it reaches into his thoughts and makes him know his purpose. The last text, blurred at the very end, is one of the complexes the Foundation has started targeting, which is the exhilaration of severing a finger from a squirming human hand, i.e., transcendence.
Nice.
Ultimately, though, knowing that the entity in question is SCP-3125 doesn't really matter that much for the overall article,
Right.
as the point is that, once again, the Foundation tried to come up with an easy solution to a big problem
And made it worse.
and stumbled into something even worse.
Yep.
The fact that the solution itself turned out to be not that great, since they were destroying parts of people's brains in the process, is just icing on the cake.
What? Actually, we'll let him finish his stuff here, and I'll get into my final thoughts.
Placeholders said it best, though, in that they're now in deeper, uncharted waters, and they're unprepared for the horrors that lay there.
Yeah, you think? You think? All right, we're getting a quote. I don't think we're getting a quote. No quote. Okay. All right. Interesting video and idea. Like, I mean, I gave most of my thoughts as we went through the video, so I'll kind of like summarize it here. I mean, they're basically gonna do, I guess, and I guess maybe the next part, potentially, or you know, of this series, what I had said earlier, where like, you know, it just seems illogical to me to try to erase concepts from existence, because if you try to erase a concept of it from existence, you're then like literally altering the fundamentals of reality and how we can perceive and understand reality, and you're taking something away from our existence, right? So like, that to me, it feels like it's really the opposite way of how the Foundation would want to go about it, you know? So as I had said earlier, I feel like the better way of doing it, if you understand how deities are created, i.e. our thoughts and ideas and whatever create these deities, and then our worship of them or belief in them gives them their power, then the controlling of that, you know, process would be how you would go about controlling these deities, not essentially feeding them power. So I mean, you know, going and sending out mobile tasks, like they were doing that, sending out mobile task force to go after these cults and destroy them, and you know, on a certain level it was having some effect, but not enough. And so the idea would have to be, you know, controlling essentially, you know, basically, like I had said, kind of how the Emperor in the 40K universe tried to set up, you know, the you know, imperial truth, this kind of secular thought where religion and gods don't really exist, and kind of like tried to essentially create this path of like science and progress and enlightenment through science that way, and understanding of the universe and reality that way, to essentially not allow humanity to feed into the chaos gods in the 40K universe. Something along those lines is what the SCP Foundation would want to do in their universe, you know, either by doing something similar, you know, just trying to make the idea of religion and worship, you know, taboo, or, you know, turn it into something where it's like, oh, you're, you know, I don't know how to really put it, but like, you know, it's something that people just don't really do and people look down upon. You know, you're seen as kind of like lesser than if you worship things, etc., or doing what they're essentially seeming they're going to do, create a religion or an entity that is, you know, the ideals, like the positive ideals they want to instill in humanity, and make it a protector and give it its power and control the flow of worship and power to this entity, so that you can then essentially, you know, create this entity that is a protector of humanity to fight off all these other beings and keep them from being able to affect our reality while also still having control over its worship, etc., etc. I said that from the beginning, that I feel like that would be the better ways to go about it, you know, on the twofold front, you know, sending out task force to remove any kind of worship of these negative and harmful entities, and while also creating a deity of their own to combat them in this, you know, noosphere space. It's just unfortunate that I guess, you know, through the, you know, experimentation that Blake was trying to do to find this other entity, he ended up essentially, I don't necessarily know about creating, maybe recreated, but definitely gave, you know, this star god more power, and essentially made him this, you know, greater concept because of his faith, you know. So yeah, interesting stories and ideas. I mean, like I said, it's getting into some pretty heavy and out there ideas of consciousness and you know, how our consciousness affects reality, and you know, how playing with the collective consciousness can affect us, essentially. So, but it's interesting stuff. It's these are interesting topics that I like to kind of get into and think about, because it's just fun and interesting to think about, you know. So, but yeah, that was SCP-6659 Metagnostic. Links will be down below, as always, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the Exploring Series channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video as we went through it, be sure to give it a like. And if you haven't hit that sub button on the the Exploring Series channel, do me a favor, you know, if you enjoy the man's content, hit that sub button and show him some love. If you'd like to join us as I do these reactions live with my YouTube members, as I'm doing right now, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. If you've been around the channel for a while and want to take your support to the next level, take a look at those, see if any of that would have any interest for you. Regardless, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Hope you all are having yourselves a wonderful start to the new year. We'll see you next time.